Well, good morning. I'm Ted Gardner, and I'm an interviewer for the Library of Congress Oral History Project, so capably handled here by our Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County, and Dennis Daly is our fearless leader and our videographer. And we're interviewing today a friend, which is a great honor for me, Dick Pandorf. Resident of Cincinnati, longtime resident, businessman, still active in business, and of course a World War II veteran. Dick, where were you born?
I was born in Cincinnati on June the 9th, 1922.
And where did you go to school, elementary school?
I went to elementary school in Oakley.
Oh, yeah.
And from there, I went to Withrow High School, junior high, and then senior, and graduated in the senior in 1940.
What? Tell me about your family. Do you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, mother and father had two brothers. Charles, a year older than I am, and Frank was 2-3 years younger than I am, and we all went to Oakley and Withrow.
Well, how about that?
Graduated from there.
That's
Yes.
wonderful. What kind of interest did you have in high school, for example, at Withrow? Did you play sports, or did you?
No, unfortunately, I was too light, and I did not participate in sports. I was active in some of the clubs that were there, and and kept busy with that.
Right, that's right. Where were you on December the 7th, 1941?
I remember December the 7th, 1941, Sunday. I went that evening. I was a member of the Hyde Park Baptist Church, and they had a group that was called BYPU, the young people, and we were meeting, and instead of going into a lot of discussions regarding the Bible, we were talking about what is going to happen as a result of Pearl Harbor.
Right. Well, that that particular day, even for civilians, was an unforgettable day, of course.
How true.
A seminal point in one's life. So you graduated in June of 1940 from
Yes,
Withrow?
I did.
And what happened then?
Well, instead of going on to the university, I told Mother and Dad, I said, I'd like to get out and get a job. And the interesting thing about it was that I did get a job, and it was right down in this area. It was at the Temple Bar Building, and it was with a company that got into the sale and service of dictating machines. And the people that had this office was the Dalby Company, and Mr. Dalby, who the senior, was a very good friend of Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison got the Ediphone Company dictating equipment, and I worked for them for not quite a year, and decided that I was going to pull up stakes, and I went out to Alice Chalmers in Norwood, and I worked there.
Well, now you were 18, going on 19 years of age. What the December the 7th hadn't come yet, of course.
No.
But how did you, at that time, high school students, were they aware of what was going on in Europe? You know, the war started
Yes.
a couple of years before we got into
That is
it.
true. They were. And in fact, I was anxious to see about getting into some program.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to fly. And I sent letters to Canada, and on 2 different occasions, I had papers for the Royal Canadian Air Force.
How about that? Wow.
Unfortunately, Mother and Dad, turned thumbs down, and they said, no, that is somebody else's war. And they were reluctant to sign any papers for me to go there.
I understand that.
But after Pearl Harbor, my thoughts then became even greater,
Of course.
and I enlisted then in the Army Air Corps.
Right, right. Where did they send you? Where did you first go to?
This was in the cadet program,
Mm-hmm.
and I was sent down to Kelly Field in San Antonio,
Oh, yeah.
and I was there for about 3-4 weeks, but unfortunately, during that stay, you went through a lot of testing, things of this sort, including what they called a 6-4 physical examination. During that examination, they took x-rays, and the unfortunate thing was that I have a small scar on my left lung. My grandfather, who was a doctor in Hamilton, was totally aware of this, for many, many years, and he said, Dick, there isn't anything to worry about as far as that situation is concerned. It was a disturbance, I suppose, because a bird colonel who was a flight surgeon down there called me in, and he said, Cadet, I want to show you a picture, and he showed me an x-ray of it and said, you see that? And he said, we're going to put you in the hospital for examination. Well, as a result of this, I was let out of the cadet program and was eventually sent up to Shepherd Field in northern Texas.
Okay. Well then, and that happened to a lot of fellas. There were minor things,
Yes.
unfortunately, nothing that would ever really harm anybody at all.
True.
But that was the way it was in those days. So there you were in northern Texas.
Yes.
You were getting to know the state of Texas.
Yes.
Fairly well.
And this was, of course, boot camp.
Right.
And we would go out on a assembly field, and there would be a lot of exercise, a lot of marching and things of this sort. But during those sessions out there, over a loudspeaker system, they would announce that the Air Corps was looking for volunteers for gunnery school. And it didn't take too many messages like this, and I went to the office, and I said I wanted to volunteer for gunnery school.
Good, good.
And I was accepted.
Excellent, excellent. Gunnery school was very intensive training.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, let me say, in the course of getting there, I think that we were 3 days on troop trains because we traveled all over the Northwest, and finally wound up in Las Vegas.
Well, for heaven's sake.
And I found one of the things, and that is that on weekends, don't stay in the bunk, get out, because they were in the process up in the mountains of setting up new gunnery areas. We dug holes in order to put stanchions down in there for holding caliber 50 machine guns. And they had a track, and they would run a Jeep around this track, sort of remote towing a target, so that as the target would come to around near your station, that you would fire on this. And it was excellent. And after ground school, to learn about the Browning caliber 30 and 50 machine guns, disassembly, assembly, maintenance, things of this sort, then we were permitted to fly. And we flew in the back end of the rear cockpit of the AT-6s.
Oh yeah,
and fired caliber 30 plastic machine gun bullets that had paint on them, and you would fire at a sleeve target towed by another aircraft.
Right. And that was in Las Vegas, huh?
This was Las Vegas.
How about that? Before it became really famous.
Yes.
Or infamous.
True. Well, infamous, yes. I remember going into town one day. Dad had sent me a money order, and I went in to cash it. And I followed a fellow. There was a mining operation that went along. I think it was, they called it antimony mining. And this fellow went in and he cashed his paycheck. And I followed him, and he went up to a table, and with one roll of the dice, he lost everything. And I thought, you know, this is not for me.
What a lesson, I should say. Fortunately, you learned the lesson without having to lose. Well, that training, of course, as you pointed out, you had to tear the guns down.
Yes.
Piece by piece. And
yes.
Put them back together.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And the final test was to disassemble and then reassemble, and this was blindfolded. And the instructors would move the assembly parts around on a table, and you had to feel in order to be able to get these and to put them back together again.
Boy, that was something else. Well, then what happened after that? At the end of your training period there, you were, what, private first class?
Well, that was very interesting, Ted.
Good.
When we graduated from the gunnery program, there was a small number of the students, I was included, and we went then to Carlsbad, were sent to Carlsbad, New Mexico, and we were the first class in a new program, and this was for bombardiering and navigation instructions. And we spent about 2 months in Carlsbad. And at that particular time, we would have classes, let's say in the morning, and we'd go to a large hangar where they had equipment for training as a bombardier. And then in the afternoon, we would go to navigation courses. And this was very, very, very interesting.
You had to be able to work with the navigator on a plane, didn't you? I mean,
no,
coordination?
Later, I mean, no.
Okay.
We had a bombardier, an officer who was a bombardier navigator.
Right, I see.
And he handled all of the navigation. But during this period in training, it was interesting. They had a piece of equipment that was tubular, tripod, and that was about 8 feet in height. And it was motor driven.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about it was that we had the small D8, what they called a D8 bomb sight. And it was just a small unit. And they had an electronic device, was a crab that was on the floor. And the crab, when you would start up, we would move forward, the crab would come in on an angle, and this was our target. But the target was moving, and what you had to do was to set up your bomb sight, not only for elevation, but also to take care of drift, same as you would have if the aircraft were flying,
right,
and you had wind that was reacting on the aircraft. The bottom, at the bottom of the tripod that we were on, there was an electronic solenoid. And when we would get out, if you were accurate on your setup with the bomb sight, as it moved along, when you got to the right point, this solenoid would go off, and there was a disc on the crab that would set up a signal.
Oh.
And there was also, we had paper on there to mark that target area. And we went through a number of sessions, and I did well.
Good.
I did
I'll
well.
bet you
And even
did.
better, when we started to fly and drop 100-pound bombs on shacks. And I enjoyed that.
Oh, yeah.
The unfortunate thing, I had a partner. We were flying in AT-11s, which was a Beech, twin-engine Beech, and it had nose on it, it was all plastic for bombardier training. I had a partner who was supposed to be in the back with a motion picture camera taking pictures of my bombing out of a porthole in the floor. This guy got sick all of the time.
Oh, boy.
And I didn't get any pictures.
Oh, gee whiz.
But anyhow, we enjoyed it. In the navigation operation, it was interesting. I remember the first test that this captain gave to us, and he would put all of the vital information up on the blackboard, and you're in there and you're working with an E6B unit and things of that sort. And all of a sudden, he said, okay, we've arrived at our ETA, and it gave the time and everything else, and I was still 10 minutes up in the air on the first test. So, it was very interesting, but I enjoyed the course.
Well, I can imagine you did. How long was it before you were assigned to overseas duty?
It was a while. We went from Carlsbad, went to Augusta, Georgia. We were there, I think we were there 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Did a lot of marching because they're waiting for, you're waiting for an assignment. After that period of time, I was shipped to Greenville, South Carolina. And Greenville, South Carolina was transition. Columbia was another transition operation for B-25s. At our facility, the field was square, and you had squadrons on each one of the four corners. And I was there awaiting a crew assignment.
This was all B-25.
All B-25s. And I recall, you know, you stayed active with regard to your time and period there.
Sure.
But the interesting, I was asked to go down to they had an operation down at Myrtle Beach. And this was to go down and to fly and shoot from the upper turret of B-25 to shoot at targets on ground. They had large targets similar to years ago with the billboards that we had along the highways.
Oh, yeah.
Well, those were targets, and they also had those out in the water. And the aircraft would come in and they would rack over on the side, and you'd be able to fire at these targets as they were flying along at low level. And I went down on a Friday. I flew Friday afternoon. I flew 2 missions on Saturday. And on Sunday morning, I came back from a mission and was told to report to the operations immediately, and was told to pack my bags and everything else and flown back to Greenville. When I got back to Greenville, I was told, get all of your gear together, and they gave me a list of things, and I went to parachute shack in order to get fitted with a parachute and got all of the rest of my gear and everything else. And on Tuesday, I was on a train. I was headed to Morrison Field. I was assigned to a crew as a replacement.
Oh, wow.
That fast.
Wow.
I didn't get the opportunity to fly any transition, with a crew, but the only person that I knew on that crew was a fellow that had a bunk across the way in the barracks, that I was in. And whether I don't know the reason for the gunner that was assigned to the crew and flew with the crew not making the trip, but I have often thought that Will Lutehauser, who was the radio gunner, that he probably suggested my name, and I couldn't have been happier. With the crew that I was assigned to, and at that particular time, there were 9 crews that shipped out of Greenville, and not all of them went to Morrison Field. Some went to another area in order to be able to go, but we all wound up with virtually in the same squadron overseas.
Now, the B-25, Billy Mitchell.
Yes.
How large a crew did
There were 6 of us.
6 in the crew?
6 on the crew. We had pilot, co-pilot. The bombardier navigator was 1 person, a flight engineer, a radio gunner, and I was a gunner and then became a photo gunner.
6. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now you got the orders, and it didn't take you very long to get sent somewhere else. And where was that?
That was interesting. There were, I think, about 26 of us that boarded a Pan American, a 4-engine C-54, and we pulled out that night from Morrison, and our first stop about 5 o'clock in the morning was Georgetown, British Guiana.
Oh,
and I can remember as soon as we got on the ground, the the temperature in the aircraft started to rise because of the humid, hot conditions. And the people from down at the field came waltzing through there with a DDT bomb, and they sprayed the aircraft, and we had to sit there enclosed for 15 minutes. I guess they thought that we were bringing in contaminants and they wanted to destroy them. And to think that later that DDT was banned because it was bad for your health.
Yeah.
So, but then we left that day and flew down to Natal, Brazil. And we were held there for a few days. The rumor was that a change of destination. But then we started across Ascension Island, across Gold Coast in Africa, and then hopscotched clear across Africa, the Middle East, and wound up in Karachi, India.
Wow. Boy. What a trip that was.
Oh, yes.
What an eye-opener for a youngster from Ohio.
Oh, absolutely. I tell you, it was very, very interesting. I recall also when we got to Aden in Arabia, we stayed at our billet that night was an RAF operation, and it was hot. I stripped down to my shorts and to go to bed, and all of a sudden, you know, the bed's crawling. So I put on my slacks. I finally put on my shirt, and I said, "To hell with this." And the bus that brought us in from the airport had bench seats that went all the way across. It was open. And I thought, you know, I don't know what these other guys are, what's going on with them, but I'm not gonna I get chewed alive.
Right.
And I packed my musette bag with the kit that I had, and I went out and I fell asleep on the bench, and I thought, I'm on the bus, I won't get lost. So, and I slept there for the rest of the night.
How about that? Oh my gosh. Well, Karachi, India at that time, that must have been an interesting place too.
Well, it was. One of the things that was most interesting, and that is, I was familiar with the dirigible hangar up at Akron, and our family on 2 occasions visited there when they were assembling the Akron.
Oh my goodness.
And then later when the Macon was being assembled. And to see that large dirigible hangar that they had.
Right.
When we got to Karachi, here was a similar dirigible hangar.
Well, yeah.
And it was right near the airport. And I learned later that they were assembling in that hangar P-40s. The P-40s were crated and shipped over to Karachi, and they had crews that were putting them together. I mean, for the 10th and the 14th Air Force.
Right. Now the P-40, of course, that was the Warhawk.
Yes.
And but that was a single engine, of course, a fighter plane. But
Yes.
it was only a one-man plane.
Single seat, yes.
Single seat.
Yes.
Right. So you didn't have an assignment to that kind of a
No.
plane, did you?
No, no.
No, of course not. But did you work on armament for other planes when you were at
No.
a base?
When I arrived at our field, it was called Chukulia, It was about 100 miles west of Calcutta. And all of the gunners were in the same barracks and with the armament people, the ground personnel. I was assigned to a particular aircraft. We had 16 B-25s in our squadron, and I was assigned to a particular aircraft and to that ground crew. And we became very, very close. And I assisted not only on the armament, but if there was other requirements to help the engineers on maintenance of the aircraft, or Will Luthauser, our radio man, if he had to put new antennas up and help him with that. So you kept busy all of the time. And you were, the thing that you were always concerned with was the temperatures. The heat in India was just, there were times when we would be rolled out at say 4:30 in the morning, and we'd go out and we'd work under lights. And then by 9 o'clock, the temperature would be so high you couldn't touch an airplane. Wow. So we would come in, we'd have breakfast at that time, and then try to do whatever you could in order to maintain and stay cool.
My goodness. Yeah, those living conditions must have been just atrocious.
Oh yes. Then the monsoons would come, and for 3 months you would have rain, and it would just flood everything out around.
Right.
And everything that was in the ground would start to come out. And it really was something. I mean,
all the creepy crawlers and
oh
everything.
yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
my goodness sakes. What an education. What an education.
Quite true.
I should say. Well, now let's see, at this time you were, you were about 20, weren't you? Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
During we were just about a year, 1943 in India. And at that time, I mean, I had my 20th birthday, yes.
How about that? Well, okay, now, the interesting thing, of course, we've got to hear about is your experience in flying up over the hump and that sort of thing. Start telling us about that.
Well, okay, about, it was, let's see, we arrived March. My first mission was in second week of April. And it was interesting. This was bombing in, the Japanese, of course, had taken over in the 30s, taken over eastern and southern China. They had come through Thailand and Cambodia and that area and all the way over. They had gotten into Rangoon, into southern Burma, and then worked their way north, Mandalay, and all the way up to the northern area, a place called Mishina, which was just south of the Burma Road area. With all of the troop movements that were going on in Burma, our squadrons and a sister squadron, the 491st, I was the 22nd, the 341st Bomb Group. And there were 4 squadrons in that. There was the 11th, the 22nd, the 490th, and the 491st. The 22nd, which I was assigned to, and the 491st were on the same field, and we operated together in coordinated missions. The others were, one of them was up in Assam, and the other one was up in China. Our missions were to go out and to go after anything that moved, and that could be truck transports, it could be railroads, it could be rivers, and or concentrations of encampments of the Japanese. And on the first mission that I was on, we all of a sudden somebody yelled bogeys, and we were on the alert. When we would go over what we call the Chin Hills, which separated Burma and India, you were in then a combat zone.
Mm-hmm.
And we would always test fire guns. We were on the alert. I was riding an upper turret then at that particular time on the aircraft. And you were scanning the skies. And I recall the aircraft moving, I'm facing the rear, and all of a sudden from the right, here is a black single-engine fighter that came swooping up and rolled out over my head and over our aircraft and went on down. And when we were in gunnery school, we would have flashcards, and these would have the silhouette of enemy fighters or bombers, and they would flash these in front of you and say, okay, identification cards. And I thought, that was not a Japanese aircraft. And the silhouette was that of an ME-109.
Messerschmitt. Wow.
And anyhow, there were no others that came into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
We continued on our flight. But it turned out later that some of the others, there was a squadron of enemy fighters that were down below us. Where they were going, I mean, we don't know. But I learned later from one of my friends who was a pilot. He was on the same mission, and he saw this aircraft, the enemy aircraft down below, and he also saw this single one that looked like an ME-109. And we found out later that the Germans had gotten together with the Japanese and given them information regarding, and that the Japanese had made some similar to an ME-109. This was a squadron commander, we learned later, that was flying this particular aircraft. But anyhow, we would go after these targets of opportunity or be assigned, and that was our mission in Burma.
How many missions did you fly?
I flew a total of 48
48 missions.
in India and China.
Wow.
Yes.
That's an awful lot. Awful lot of time in the air. Were those long missions? I mean,
Missions ran
several hundred miles?
6.5 hours generally. I had one out of when we were in China that was 8 hours and 10 minutes.
Wow.
And that was, we judged that we had less than 50 gallons of fuel on board when we got to the advanced base.
Coming in on fumes.
Yes.
Well, that
Our missions, ran from the North Mission down to just below Mandalay.
Oh.
And we ran this corridor throughout the length and breadth of that area. And there were B-24s that were in India that would go from Mandalay all the way down to Rangoon. And they took care of the southern portion, and we took care of the northern.
Yeah, that B-24, that was a big
Oh,
four-engine
yes.
bomber, wasn't it?
Well, they had the range.
Consolidated, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, conditions aboard the plane. Now, when you were on a mission like that, that must have been, you were kind of cramped, weren't you? And kind of.
No, it wasn't too bad. From that standpoint, we had enough route that we could move around. But
move around. Right.
I think that when I was up in the turret, able to, you were sitting on a bicycle seat on that turret, and you could move around in order to move the turret around in order to be able to, but you know, I had no discomforts whatsoever, Ted. I mean, with regard to that.
Now, that was a 50 caliber, was it, in that turret?
Twin caliber 50s.
Twin 50.
Twin caliber 50s.
Boy.
We also, the aircraft that we had in India were the C and D models of the B-25. And on the tail of the aircraft was a plastic cone. And what they did was to cut a hole in it. It was about 6 inches or so in diameter. And they put a caliber 30 sticking out of the tail, and it was on a support that would allow it to jiggle around. And I had a push button on the turret that if someone got on our tail and he was below the axis of my being able to fire on him, then I would just push on the caliber 30 gun and it would jiggle, and it was just like shotguns, you know, and the guy got off your tail. So, which, you know, we've had this happen.
Right, right. Experiences about fighting against the enemy.
Oh, yes, yes. I have to, on one of the C models, they had a lower ventral turret, and the radio operator on the flight had a periscope that he could use. Well, that turned out to be just a poor venture. And at the fab operations, they pulled those turrets out, and you had a hole in the bottom of the aircraft that was about 24, 30 inches in diameter. And they put sheet metal over the top of it in order to be able to protect that. On one of my missions, we were ready to board the aircraft. Excuse me. We were board the aircraft, and our photo people came out in the Jeep, and they stopped, and they had a large camera, plate type camera. And they said, "We want you to take some pictures of the bombing mission." And I said, "Okay." And they gave me some simple instructions on the operation of the camera. And we got up over central Burma. I don't know whether, I can't really recall now whether it was Mandalay or somewhere in that neighborhood. And we came on the bomb run, and I get up, I'm standing over the hole, and holding the camera in hand, and I had bombs away, and I see the bombs that are falling, and I'm watching all of this because I want to catch them when the concussion of the bombs. And all of a sudden, I mean, we pull up in a chandelle, and this thing's going down like this, and I salvoed it, the camera. I thought, I can't hold on to this thing. I mean, the force, I mean, was such, and I said, I'm not going through the hole. And so the reason for pulling up so rapidly was that a lot of flak up ahead of us. And the pilot took that action. Well, the crew, the photo people, when we got back on the ground, came out to the aircraft, and I told them what went on, and they got a kick out of that, you know. But it was one of the, later we were given small cameras to be able to take pictures. And that we also got new aircraft when we got to China.
Oh, you
And
did?
that helped quite a bit.
Okay.
Yes,
Replacement aircraft.
yes.
Yeah.
Newer models.
Newer models. Oh, my. Well, now, this was still a six-man crew.
Still six-man crew.
That's interesting because, you know, as we know, the Doolittle Raiders had a five-man crew.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
When you got up way up in the northern part of Burma, were there landing fields up there for you?
No.
Did you land there at
No.
all, or did you
No.
have to come back to base?
No, we'd come back to base.
You'd come back to base every time.
Or if you had difficulty, you could go into one of the advanced bases or to one of the bases where the transports were flying out of. There were some at Jorat and at Chabwa up in Assam that had fields where the C-47s and C-46s would fly out. Also, there was a field where one of our other squadrons was up in there, it was Kermatola. We flew out of there on a mission on one occasion. So there were places where we could come in, or if you came in twice, we came back single engine because we had an engine shot out, and went into Dum Dum, which was the field at Calcutta.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Boy,
But
that was a long round trip.
well, yes, I mean, the most, as I say, flights of 6.5 hours,
Sure.
depending upon where your target might have been.
Right. What was the capacity, fuel capacity of a plane like that?
Just under 1,000 gallons.
1,000 gallons. Wow.
Just under 1,000
Yeah.
gallons. And if you got on a longer, but now, as I mentioned before, the longest mission was 8 hours and 10 minutes. That was some months later when we were operating out of China,
Oh,
and
I see.
on a mission, and we had difficulty finding our advanced base that we had flown from. So, but we got in there.
How about flying through those mountains? Conditions.
The mountains are interesting, but the weather conditions are even worse. When we transferred from India to China in the first of 1944, our missions would take us up to, say, 10,000 feet in order to get over the cloud conditions. And I recall one time we're two-plane element when we were there. We were going down towards the south coast of China, and I was flying with Tommy Thompson, and he told the number 2 plane to stay up on top. We went down to an indicated 350 feet, and we still hadn't broken out. And we went back up on top, and then look for an alternate
Oh,
target,
yeah, oh my goodness.
because we still weren't certain of what we were going to run into,
Sure.
whether we were out over the water or not.
Terribly dangerous, good heavens.
That was the unfortunate thing, that because of the weather, and this is one of the things that the transport pilots, here they are with a load of gasoline or other ordnance, things that on board, and they're flying the hump, I mean, from Chabwa to Kunming, back and forth, maybe, 2-4 missions a day, on round trips,
Sure.
and
Good.
fighting the weather.
Right.
And I just finished a book that was written by one of the navigators with the Air Transport Command, and on the missions, and they had to bail out because they were lost over the mountains and on the verge of running out of fuel, and it's most interesting reading.
Oh, I can imagine so. How about some of the interesting personalities that you met in that area? You talked about, you told us earlier about being close to Major General Claire Chennault, for example.
Well, he was the only one that, of course, I mean, was the commander of the 14th Air Force. The others were personnel, I mean, that we had, within our own group.
Sure.
We had 10 Doolittle Raiders that were assigned to our squadron.
Oh, you did.
And there were 2 of them. Fred Bramer, who was a bombardier on number 1 aircraft, Jimmy Doolittle's aircraft. He was a tech or master, tech sergeant, an enlisted man, and then a fellow named Aiden Jones, who was on, I believe, the number 4 aircraft as a bombardier. It was interesting, I mean, that a number of the bombardiers on board the Doolittle Raiders were enlisted men, because they weren't using, they didn't have a Norden bomb sight. There was a major, and I believe he was down at Eglin, who developed a little bomb sight, that a metal piece that you could calibrate and move around. And they certainly were not going to take a Nordens, because all of that was low level.
Oh, I see.
To the operations. So they stripped the aircraft down to a bare minimum, as far as anything that, if they were forced down in Japan, that could be used, I mean, to help their conditions.
Oh, yes, I should say. Any other particularly interesting or humorous experiences that you can think of in those days?
No, not really. I would just say that when we were in Calcutta area, to visit some of the temples that they had there, the conditions. We'd get pass every other month and go spend a couple of days in Calcutta. At least it gave you a transition from the everyday conditions and to be able to get some decent food and a little entertainment, things of that sort.
Right. Did you ever see a USO troop or anything of that nature?
We had 2 different occasions. Paulette Goddard came, and I can't remember on the other when she was there with her husband. No, I take it back. That was with Lily Pons and her husband.
Great singer.
And but the troops got around to various places. That I had one opportunity. I made a trip back to Karachi, and there were two of us that flew on a C-47, and we made a stop in Agra in order to be able, and we went to visit the Taj Mahal.
Oh boy!
And that is one of the most beautiful places that it's just absolutely marvelous to see.
How about the chow, the food?
Oh, well, that was our mess in China was an improvement over what we had in India.
It was.
Greatly. But in India, we had everything was out of mess kits. And one of the most interesting things is that if you finished your breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and you still had something on your mess kit, you would go outside. They had boiling water in 55-gallon tanks in order to be able. First, you'd scrape them off, and if you were standing in line, there would be birds that would fly down, and they would, if you had your mess kit out and holding it out like so, they'd come down and they would pick food right out of your mess kit.
Oh my God!
And fly off. I might say also that in the province that we were in India, they had had a drought for a long period of time. The crops weren't coming through, the rice, and they'd pick up this large drum of garbage from the mess halls and load it onto a two-wheeled ox cart. And there was a dump that was several miles down the road. A lot of times that would never get there. Wow. Because someone would get up on there and the people would line the roads with any type of container they could find in order to be able to get what was left over there.
Horrible conditions.
Yeah, it was just, it was terrible.
Right.
And
well, in a couple minutes we have left, Dick, can you wrap up the end of the war for you and coming back to the States?
yes, I would say that when I got out of the service, when I came back to the States, let me say this, when I came back to the States, that I went to gunnery instructor school. And upon completion of that, there were 10 of us that went on a temporary duty on a special project. And we ventured up to MIT in Boston, and we learned that they were working on a new radar unit to be used on the tail turrets of B-29 guns.
Oh.
And the balance of my military service was on temporary duty with regard to that program. And we went to a number of fields. I went to Salina, Kansas, which was B-29 operation. They had turrets out in the field, and we fired, learned how to use, because that had a separate sighting system from the turret. And we would fire it on radio-controlled aircraft. And once we became, familiar with that, Then we went on to Eglin Field, and I had an opportunity. I had 6 flights in B-29s.
Oh, you did?
And our equipment, this temporary equipment was put on the tail turret, and they would fly drones in there in order to be able to, first we took pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually we had an opportunity, and they flew radio controlled a single engine airplane that was called a Culver Cadet, and there were 6 of those shot down.
Wow.
Then I went to the University of Techno. I flew as an instructor on a B-24 that had B-29 the GE gunnery equipment on board, and I spent 6 months with training students on the use of it, and then spent the latter part up at the University of Texas, still working on the same program with a bunch of doctors.
How about that? Well, you have had tremendous experience, and you've given us such a good insight, Dick, into what went on in those days and how you lived with it. You came back and you became a family man and a successful businessman and so forth, and back in your hometown again of Cincinnati. We want to thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. It's been an honor
Ted,
and a pleasure, and a friend.
It is my pleasure also. I thank you.
Thank you so much, and God bless you, and
thank you.
We'll keep them flying.
Thank you very much.
All right.
All right.